In an age of algorithmic-fueled content, we are constantly panicking. It feels like we are in a real war for the hearts and minds of other people, and they might fall away to the other side who is going to destroy everything we hold dear. If someone that we respect and generally agree with brings up a big issue, we're likely to jump on board just because we like them and accept whatever they say about a person or a group or even a book genre that we are not in agreement with ourselves. This is leading to a lot of small-scale moral panics that are being crafted and used from people who would honestly deeply disagree with each other. It is not my side does not create moral panics and your side does, but it is something that is applying somewhat to everyone in a period on the internet that rewards extreme takes and de-incentivizes nuance. In this video, we are going to talk about moral panics and what they are. We are going to talk about how they've seeped a little bit into bookish discourse online specifically, because although moral panics oftentimes can be examined in the political realm, they can also be examined easily in the bookish realm. At the end of this video, I will talk about some solutions you can implement to avoid being taken by moral panics too often. And some of these solutions will include humility, respect for others, and situational awareness. Coining the term moral panic. Jock Young was a British sociologist and criminologist. He was famous for looking into the drug problem in Wales in the 1960s. This is the guy who first coined the term moral panic. The term later got applied to a lot of historical events that definitely showed some amount of wide-scale moral panic. In 1972, Stanley Cohen expanded on the idea of the moral panic when he published his book that became popular called Folk Devils and Moral Panics. Folk devils were described as a group of people who were identified as a group that could potentially bring harm to greater society. Basically, you are afraid that a group is going to harm the society that you love, and that you need to do something about their existence. Due to the time period the book was released in, the author of the book focused on two subcultures that were in Britain at the time. The mods, who were like a group of people who liked to dress in sleek Italian fashion and listen to modern jazz music, and the rockers, who liked to ride motorcycles, probably way too fast, wear leather jackets, and listen to rock music. The horror. Cohen tried to describe the anatomy of a moral panic by talking about the steps that usually happen when a moral panic starts. We're going to look at these. I want you to think about why these might be happening a lot right now, and then I'm going to give an opinion based on my analysis of this of why moral panics to me feel different in 2025 than they even were in 1972. So his steps. Number 1, an event, condition, episode, person, or group of persons is perceived and defined as a threat to societal values, safety, and interests. So identify the threat. Number 2, the nature of these apparent threats are amplified by mass media who present the supposed threat through simplistic, symbolic rhetoric. They identify the folk devils. So you need someone who is getting the information out to a large group of people in a simplified, unnuanced way in order to identify who the problem is. Number 3, a sense of social anxiety and concern among the public is aroused through these symbolic representations of the threat. Self-explanatory. Number 4, the gatekeepers of morality, moral thinking people, respond to the threat with socially accredited experts pronouncing their diagnosis and solutions to the threat. You get someone who tells you what to do and how to fix the problem. Number 5, the condition then disappears, submerges, or deteriorates and becomes more visible. Number 5 just describes that multiple things can happen at the end of a moral panic. Sometimes what happens is after the time has run its course, it just dies out and goes away, and people almost forget that it existed. I want to talk about a few of these steps specifically and how I think they might apply a little bit differently in 2025. This is my own personal analysis, and I can't back it up with someone more educated on the topic than me, but I still think it's interesting. A lot of people will say that humans have always been the same, morally speaking, whether we're talking about now or 100 years ago, and people oftentimes will try to say that humans are worse now when that's just not the reality. I generally agree with that. I do think that when the way we communicate changes, something like the anatomy of a moral panic can shift. Not because we are any better or worse, but because the way we are engaging is different. Let's talk about number 2 in his anatomy. Number 2 is the one that talks about the threats are amplified by mass media. If you think about the 1970s, in order to get your voice heard by a lot of people, you were going to need to actively work to get platformed. You might get on a talk show, you might get on the news, you might get on the radio, but someone would have to decide that you were worth platforming, and people generally watched similar things. There were channels that almost every American watched in America, for example. In 2025, this is not the same. We can be heard by a large group of people by setting up an iPhone and uploading a video to YouTube. You no longer have to get platformed. You can almost easily platform yourself if we're talking YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, or what's the Substack, the writing one? There's so many places you can just upload what you want to the internet, and if you get views, you can become the person that spreads information. And also, people are watching other things. You're watching this. This is so incredibly niche. Your neighbor next door is probably not watching this. This means that there's a lot of subcultures forming and a lot of tribal-like groups forming on the internet that make it a little bit different, I think, than a time before the internet. So my idea is that we get fewer large-scale broad moral panics. We still see this a little bit in politics to some extent, but we get a lot more small-scale, community-based, mini, micro moral panics as we agree with our group and get scared of what they are presenting to us. We will definitely examine a couple of groups I found in the bookish community in a minute. Let's talk for a second about number 4. Number 4 was the one about an expert that tells you how to respond to a threat. This is the same thing as number 2. Before, you would have to somehow get platformed. Now you can easily get on the internet and platform yourself, meaning that an expert who tells people what to do could be anyone that they happen to listen to on the internet, and it's probably someone different than who their neighbor is listening to, meaning you have lots and lots of different moral authorities and experts, whatever makes them an expert, sometimes it's just a following, telling people how to react in all these little micro communities. We identify different threats and different folk devils and somehow engage in some form of online, idea-based tribal warfare. Sure, we don't have a lot of gore, and sure, we're oftentimes just using inflammatory language, so traditional tribal warfare in this case might have been replaced by the sound of a clickety-clackety keyboard. Also, I really enjoy clickety-clackety keyboards. This is all unlikely to go away though, because as Jack Young said in a later paper describing moral panic, there is energy, there is fascination, and something edging on enjoyment. Moral panics, like crime, are seductive events. To some extent, we enjoy engaging in moral panics, as our fears and emotions are heightened by our sense that these folk devils that we have identified in our micro community are going to potentially damage society and our lives in the years to come. Moral panics produce real results. I promise I'll get into some concrete examples that I think are little mini community moral panics in a minute. You might have seen the thumbnail. But first, I want to talk about how sometimes a moral panic can produce the result that you don't want to produce. Stephen Davies from the Daily Economy summarizes an effect that moral panics can have. He said, Again, the group may be a real, actually existing one that is demonized and caricatured, or it may again be completely imaginary with no actual existence. Confusingly, though, in some cases, an initially imaginary group or subculture becomes real as people start to adopt the behavior and appearance of the invented and imaginary deviant group. This is sort of a claim that making a group that you disagree with into a caricature can actually turn them into a caricature. I would say in recent times, there has been within some part of the community a little bit of a moral panic concerning trad wives. The idea is that these traditional wives are threatening to us feminists and they are going to set us back years. The idea of a real-life Handmaid's Tale comes to mind. So it could definitely be argued that housewives became folk devils to a certain group of people. And when they became that idea, that caricature of a woman who doesn't care about having a voice, and who wants to dress up for her husband and cook constantly, you have a bunch of accounts on social media that double down on that idea and turn into the caricature that was originally described, even if that is not exactly how that group of people completely behaved in the first place. A Mormon moral panic. Let's talk about me. I am a 29-year-old educated liberal woman. And if that's not who you would usually listen to, still stick around, we might get along. I used to be a 19-year-old, somewhat conservative, moral missionary living in Mexico and speaking Spanish in the hopes of converting everyone to the one true church that I later personally left behind. Even before that, I was a 12-year-old girl on a road trip with my dad when I picked up my very first copy of Twilight. I read that book so quickly and loved every page of it. I was reading was a good thing, and I was having so much fun. And then I went to church. When I went to church, I realized that a lot of people within my community were panicking a little bit about the release of Twilight, and especially worried about young girls who were reading these books. It was going to influence us down a path that was worldly and make us deviate from the virtues we were supposed to uphold as young women in our church. I want to say that this was the early years and not everyone was saying this. It was a little bit of an internal debate, even though it was enough to make me want to hide the books in my backpack because I knew that a lot of people would not approve of me reading Stephenie Meyer and of me reading the Twilight books. Many people know that Stephenie Meyer herself is actually Mormon. And to be fair, in 2025, this controversy is completely gone from the community, and there could even be Mormons in the comments telling me that I am completely wrong about this because no one cares about Twilight, which is actually part of the step of a moral panic. If you remember step 5, it says the condition then disappears, submerges, or deteriorates and becomes more visible. This one actually did completely disappear, and Mormons are generally fine with Twilight. I remember 2008, though. Here is a blog post from 2008 called Twilight and the Great Mormon Novel. It captures both the debate and a little bit of the moral panic that some people were contributing to. Mormon Soprano responds to the idea that maybe Twilight is not all that big of a deal by saying, "I submit to you that Meyer's books are the antithesis of Mormon doctrine and should be disturbing to any faithful active member. Just reading these books cause erotic thoughts and feelings because of what the characters are doing to and with each other. Stephenie Meyer's books are such a big hit with the world because they are titillating. The tragedy to me is that Meyer is continually referred to as a Mormon and LDS, and her books have been giving a free pass to sell at Deseret Book and Siegel bookstores, which are like bookstores that are run by the church. Please wake up out of your vampire trances, my Twilight friends. There is nothing lovely or praiseworthy or of good report to be found in these books or movies. Faithful Latter-day Saints need to send a message that lowered standards are never acceptable. My advice is to stop buying these books, send a letter of complaint to LDS bookstores, and refuse to spend your money in support of this new movie." Maybe it wasn't the whole community that was engaging in the moral panic, but a large part of it was. Stephenie Meyer in Twilight itself was infiltrating the community and putting the young, virtuous women at risk of becoming worldly. It was probably concerning to some of my youth leaders at church when one day I showed up with Anne of Green Gables, and the next day I showed up with a copy of Twilight. This is actually conservative propaganda. So I did distance myself from Mormonism. I still have a lot of friends and family that are in that group, and I don't want to create a moral panic that they are all evil either. After experiencing religious conservative moral panics throughout my life, little mini ones that arose like this, I kind of thought that it might belong to that group. I later found out that I was completely wrong. Romantasy is a genre of fantasy mixed with romance. You've likely seen these books at the bookstore if you've gone to a bookstore anytime in the last 5 to 10 years. A Court of Thorns and Roses is a popular one. Fourth Wing is a popular one. Usually what makes something a romantasy is that the romance plot of the book is essential to the story, and without it, it wouldn't really make sense. It's a very, very big part of the book. Most of these books do depict a young girl that does meet an older, more powerful, dominant type of guy who might actually even have some concerning attributes and traits if we were to actually put that guy into the real world. Sometimes he's a fairy, hence the term fairy smut. Sometimes he's a demon. Sometimes he's a vampire. Sometimes he's just a human. It's a huge genre, but people online, when they start little moral panics one way or the other about romantasy, tend to focus on the most popular ones. There is a little bit of a moral panic, like a mini micro moral panic, that these romantasy books are going to cause women to fall into internalized misogyny as they learn to accept bad behavior from men, like the behavior that is sometimes shown in some of these books. First, I'd like to say that the behavior is usually a little bit exaggerated, but I can definitely concede that they do definitely oftentimes follow this general format. Willow Talks Books made a video called "Romantasy Books Are Toxic, Lazy, Conservative Propaganda." Real quick, I want to actually point out that I don't personally dislike Willow. If I didn't already have my own opinion formed on this topic, it might have been easy in an alternative world for me to nod along and be cool with what she said. She's, at the very least, a very compelling speaker. She starts by making an analogy that, in my opinion, kind of sets up the romantasy genre and the tropes within them as folk devils for her community.
You know that guy that you once crossed the street to get away from because he looked a little bit unsavory and suspect? And then when you finally did cross the street, he catcalled you and shouted misogynistic and demeaning things at you?
That is definitely a caricature, but we know where she is going.
Imagine if that guy was a really hot fairy. Welcome to the romantasy genre.
The lazy part of her thesis has to do with world building. This really isn't a video about quality of books, and I'm not even going to share my opinion right now about what I would personally rate each individual popular romantasy book. So we're really just not going to respond to the lazy world building part because it's irrelevant. The other major claim she makes is that it's toxic conservative propaganda. The rest of her argument relies on the idea that the reason women read romantasy is for escapism. She defines what she would expect escapism to be for them and then kind of defeats that argument. In her defense, I do think a lot of women would say escapism when they defend reading romantasy. A lot of romantasy readers read these books for fun. The way she sets this up, though, is she says, okay, if you're trying to escape the real world, which is a patriarchal, oppressive culture, and you are trying to also escape how exhausting capitalism can be, why are you reading a romantasy book where the men in those books don't seem to be better to me than the men in the real world? It's not escapism if it's kind of the same type of guy. She then goes to make the claim that since these men are not the type of men that she would like to see represented in these books, they must be conservative, tradwife propaganda, subtly tricking women who don't have media literacy enough to understand what's happening in the book into accepting things that they should not accept and normalizing and romanticizing things that shouldn't be normalized and romanticized. The exaggeration of the material in this argument and the assumption that it is going to be morally harmful to a group of people that she cares about is enough to already describe this as a moral panic. Oh, the poor silly women who have to be saved from these novels that they can't personally figure out how to accurately analyze, and we should make sure to save them from that fate. They don't realize how toxic they really are, and they can't identify the patriarchy that are within these books, and they think it's escapism, but really they're being fed ideas that are going to harm them and are going to harm society as a whole. So while I feel like I've said enough to justify this being a little micro moral panic within a very specific community, I want to actually address her actual claim, although that's a little bit of a tangent, because I don't think she set up this argument in a way that's really fair for some women who like these books. Because if she were to ask me why have I read some of these books, I would give a different answer than escaping patriarchy and capitalism and entering a new world. That's not what I would say. And my reasoning is honestly probably not even your reasoning. And I think a problem with this is setting up an argument for your opponent that you get to choose. What I would say for why I enjoy romantasy is because when I was young, I was definitely taught different gender dynamics. I mean, explicitly so, as a Mormon girl that was sort of within a generally conservative culture. I also don't want to pinpoint Mormons as just conservative because there are liberals, but it was definitely fairly traditional. When I was 12 in Sunday school with just the young women, we would get in groups and talk about what made an ideal man. We would make these lists, and we would be told sometimes what should definitely be included on those lists. We were also told how to be good women, and what it meant to be a woman, and what traits women have that make them amazing. And that is so on the nose. And I know that most people who are living in our culture probably don't get told these things so directly as if it's an actual lesson to be learned. But we do pick up subtle cues because we exist within a culture that is our reality. It does make a lot of women attracted to strong, masculine men, and it sometimes even gives women an attraction to men that might not even be the best. There have been plenty of people who've made the case that the reason some women enjoy books or even real life situations, which is uncomfortable for me to talk about because I don't generally talk about sex, and this is not even me. Some women enjoy consensual non-consent because they have been so shamed about sex in their life that ironically makes them feel safer because they don't feel like they are making the negative decision, but rather they're making the decision to let it be done to them. And you can definitely say that that is concerning and that you don't like that, but the reality is a lot of women can't really change how they have been taught to enjoy sexuality and what they are attracted to.
Most people do not experience their sexual orientation as the result of a rational process of consciously deciding the correct course of action after considering the advice of trusted colleagues.
Okay, so that clip was legitimately taken out of context, but there was an interesting video to watch. All I'm saying is if these books have some sort of archetypal man in them, and if they are flying off the shelves, that they probably appeal to a lot of women, even if you can't understand the appeal. And I would say, what is a safer way to engage with something than a book? What if you are actually agreeing with Willow, like some women might, that they don't like men who have particular traits in the real world, but because of the world that they were raised in, they still have some form of attraction in a romantic sense to a man that has some of these traits. A romance book where there are red flags, but the man ends up being amazing, can be a way to kind of live that idea or fantasy in a way that's actually extremely safe because you're reading a book. Just like some Mormons were afraid that Twilight would send their young women down a bad worldly path, I've seen some people claim that reading a romantasy book will automatically make someone a conservative, which to them is a bad thing, and that your politics will be decided by your escapist but not escapist fiction. These two groups are so drastically different and would not agree with each other, but they're both using some elements, at the very least, of the moral panic framework. I can't ignore this. So this is really turning into the moral panic of romantasy, although I will be mentioning a couple other books in a minute that aren't romantasy. But the reason that this is the case is because this is where a lot of the moral panic is right now. So if I'm making a video on moral panic, I need to respond to what people are actually saying, not the genres that I would rather respond to. I will say something. Hillary and Willow would not get along.
Today, I would like to focus on one of the most glaring issues plaguing modern publishing.
There is nothing better than the boom sound effect and ominous music to set up your moral panic video.
What I am offering you in this video is not my opinion or my reading preference, it is facts.
Oh, cool. So this is going to be facts and informational video. You're not going to be crafting opinions or making analysis or giving any of your own ideas.
And the first thing we need to establish is that all this so-called romance fiction and most, if not all, of the current women's literature out there is not women's literature.
She follows this statement by giving quite a few opinions, and then she puts up Fourth Wing and describes to everyone why Fourth Wing is actually just...
I know what you might be thinking. This is not XXX adult entertainment. This is. You are actually incorrect.
Interestingly enough, I already did a very, very niche video project where I counted the percentage of pages that could be considered smut in each popular romantasy book, and Fourth Wing did amount to 3.1%. Hillary says the amount doesn't matter though, because women, for their or adult content, have to have the story. They have to have all of that leading up to it, but the whole point of the book is honestly just the adult content. Oh, and that is a scary thing, by the way. Can I just do a little aside for a second and just make the claim that Fourth Wing here in her argument was one of the worst choices she could have made? You know, like in school when you were forced to do debates and they gave you which side you had to be on. If I was forced to take Hillary's side, there are so many better book choices that I could have picked in order to talk about how the book was just all smut. Because Fourth Wing, if you were to like do some sort of VidAngel version or reading of Fourth Wing, you know that VidAngel thing where you could take the sex scenes out of movies? If you could do that to Fourth Wing, it would probably still have the same audience reading it and enjoying it, because that book actually has a lot of plot compared to some other romantasy stories. Nothing to say about how well written it is, but there is plenty of plot and people have a lot of fun with the scenes that have nothing to do with the romance in that book. So that was just a poor choice, in my opinion. In her video, she has two major moral panic claims. The first one is, women's literature has been taken over by smut, which means that we're not getting real literary women's literature. I don't know what period of time she's trying to point to when she believes that women's literature, like highbrow literature, sold better than smut, but from my understanding, they used to sell bodice ripper mass market paperbacks in the grocery store. Also, I am reading Piranesi by Susanna Clarke right now, which is very, very popular and has no smut in it. And I just picked up Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, which was the winner of the 2022 Pulitzer Prize. It might not have sold as many copies as Fourth Wing, but did you really expect it to? And the second moral panic claim, that is the majority of her video, is that we really need to be concerned about women consuming adult content. She makes all of these like medical claims about things that are happening to women's brains and how they're being hijacked by 2% smut romantasy books, and about how they're really becoming addicted and even somehow developing things like POCD. There have been therapists who have debunked this claim. I don't have the background to debunk it. And then she goes on to say that there are women whose lives have been destroyed by reading these 2% smut romantasy books.
Several women and teenagers remarked that they wished they had never started reading erotic fiction when they were younger, as they believed it had destroyed their lives.
To be fair, she does try to make the claim that like a Court of Thorns and Roses is sort of like a gateway romantasy book into darker genres later. I honestly just don't have a problem with adult content being consumed generally, personally. That being said, the idea that someone picking up a book with 10 pages of a sex scene and it destroying their lives just feels crazy to me. I don't know exactly how to counter that, though, if people really believe it. All I will say is that one part of the anatomy of a moral panic is disproportionality, where the threat, in this case romantasy or other romance-type books that include smut, is exaggerated. I do think that there's definitely exaggeration in this video, especially when it comes to these vague women whose lives have been destroyed by 10 pages of a sex scene. I'm guessing she probably doesn't think that it's conservative propaganda. Don't forget to background check the author. Not to incite a moral panic myself, but I do feel like I'm in a culture where I need to prepare to defend myself from reading any book that is written by a controversial author. 10 years ago, the position was to buy Harry Potter used. Now, for some people, the position is to not read Harry Potter at all, even if you have some sort of nostalgic connection, or even if you're separating your experience of it from the author. You can completely agree with people's opposition to Harry Potter and even not support it financially, and still be sort of deviating from the group as a Harry Potter fan. For the record, I am not a Harry Potter fan because I don't really like Harry Potter all that much, but I still see that this is definitely happening a lot to people that I associate with. Like a book, but not an author, you have to try to handle that situation perfectly, especially if the people that you would consider part of your tribe have already made their moral judgment. With that in mind, there's probably a case to be made for me getting rid of my favorite Lovecraft-based Cthulhu card game, because he sucked. To be fair, moral panic like this is not new. I've made a case that maybe we're performing moral panic a little bit differently because of the methods of communication we use, but go back in history and there would have been a moral panic about you reading certain books in different time periods as well. People have always attached ton of morality to the choice of books that other people consume. One thing that bothers me about this whole discussion is how much you are just expected to believe before you have gotten to the point of believing something yourself. Author scandal after author scandal seems to flood my feed and flood my brain with too much information that I personally don't always have time to completely process. In his video, Truth versus Lies, The Science of Why We Believe Misinformation, Johnny Harris meets with a leading expert at the MIT Department of Brain and Cognitive Science. She makes a point that I think we've all heard before, but I do try to constantly remind myself of.
Also more likely to go out and seek information, opinions, and data that confirms what we already believe. And on the other hand, we're less likely to believe information that goes against what we already believe, and less likely to go and seek it out.
Johnny Harris spends a lot of time in his video examining why we quickly believe information that comes from a group we agree with, even when sometimes the information might be false, and why we disbelieve information that is actually true if it's coming from a group that we don't generally agree with. Even if a person is talking to us and we generally align in moral values, we have no certainty that the information that they're giving us is by default true.
That's what's so toxic about misinformation. When I see it on things that I in spirit would agree with, I feel so disappointed that the person sharing that information didn't stick to the facts.
So connecting this to my online bookish space can be kind of tough because there is a desire in part of the community to believe things that are brought up, even if the complete evidence of what you are told relies on Twitter threads or rehashing what happened in the drama discourse on a YouTube video. That being said, there are definitely some authors that have scandals that are completely credible. For example, J.K. Rowling, it's pretty easy to know that she is not supportive of the trans community. So if you are supportive of the trans community, like I am, it's not so much deciding if that is true, but rather how to react to it. As I said, I don't really read Harry Potter anyway, but I make no assumptions about someone who does. The Neil Gaiman allegations also have been very compelling and credible to me, and they have also been very devastating for a lot of long-term, lifelong fans of Neil Gaiman. And I do want to say that being deeply disappointed in not supporting an author and still having a connection to a book that is somewhat emotional, somewhat nostalgic, and somewhat a respect of the craft can still coexist. And I feel like it's really hard for us as a community to keep that nuance. Other scandals, it's really hard to know what to believe. People in the comments on my videos sometimes will tell me to watch a certain YouTube video or to read a certain blog that outlines the scandal of what happened play by play as the situation unfolded. When it comes down to it, sometimes they are probably right, and sometimes they might be wrong. And if I am someone who might agree with them morally, maybe I'd be more likely to believe that information, regardless of if it had the actual truth or if it didn't hold the actual truth. So the choice is to either directly believe everything as it is presented to you, or to try to spend hours looking into little minor scandals that come out yourself, and the information might not be publicly available. I personally think that we should just avoid putting any author on a pedestal because they very well could disappoint us later. Going after the group of people that still read the published works of authors that you have chosen to condemn either with the truth or with a perception of the truth is still counterproductive. I'm sure existing Harry Potter fans to a certain group of people have become sort of folk devils. They are the consumers who have chosen to disregard all of the credible evidence online and read Harry Potter anyway, making them most likely bad people or unsupportive people, regardless of how they even purchased the books. Or is it alchemized fans now? I think that they're definitely folk devils for some groups too. A wand and cloak bought at your local Barnes & Noble and worn on Halloween somehow becomes the folk devil outfit for a small group of people, just like the sleek Italian fashion and jazz music or the leather-clad motorcycle riders that listened to rock music in the 60s. They pose a direct threat to the people who find the continual existence of this subculture threatening to what they want society to be. Also, remember the point that if you are sort of in this group, and I know there's tons of people in the bookish community that are upset with people who even silently in their house read Harry Potter, if you are part of this community, just remember that when you turn a group into a folk devil, you sometimes make what you are afraid of worse for you. Remember the quote. Again, the group may be a real, actually existing one that is demonized and caricatured, or it may again be completely imaginary with no actual existence. Confusingly, though, in some cases, an initially imaginary group or subculture becomes real as people start to adopt the behavior and appearance of the invented imaginary deviant group. And it just comes down to making an inaccurate caricature of a group can be worse than just completely ignoring them. Can we avoid panicking? So moral panics have always happened. Sure, I've made the case in this video that they might be a little bit different as we're forming smaller communities on the internet and we're not all watching the same news program. To be fair, I don't think moral panics are ever going to go away, and I don't even think that you can usually avoid being in moral panics for the rest of your life. Most of us will fall into one every now and again. I still do have some tips for trying not to fall into them more often than you have to. It is especially hard though, because as I stated in the beginning of the video, moral panics can actually be fun. Remember the quote, "There is energy, there is fascination, and something edging on enjoyment. Moral panics like crime are seductive events." Getting outraged at a group with a group of people that you agree with can be very fun and can be very validating. Also, back to the Johnny Harris video about believing misinformation, another point that video makes is the more often you hear the same thing repeated over and over and over again, it becomes true in your brain just because of the amount of times you've heard it. So if you're in the comment section of something on the internet that you agree with, and there's hundreds of people saying the same thing, your brain starts to process whatever that thing is as truth. It can turn your opinion or speculation in your brain into what feels like a very clear-cut fact that might have been what happened to Hillary in the second story.
It is facts.
It might be a lot less sexy, sorry Hillary, to admit that you don't know, to admit that you're working with limited information. It can also be hard to admit that it's hard to really consider the other side and to stop them from becoming caricatures in your mind. My tips for avoiding moral panics include humility. You should be willing to recognize your limits. to know that you might not have all the information, to know that you might not actually have all the facts, that some of the things that you are saying are legitimately an opinion based off of your life experience, and that you could be proven wrong. It's really, really hard in a culture where you can put something online, public, for anyone to see that your face is attached to admit that you were wrong, or to recant something that you said incorrectly, or to basically out yourself, when it's oftentimes rewarded if you don't. That being said, humility is a huge part of not falling into a moral panic because you understand your own limits. My second tip is respect. Try to avoid strawmanning the person that you disagree with or the group that you disagree with. I personally think Willow's whole argument relied a little bit on a straw man that basically said that the reason that women enjoy romantasy is because they claim to want to escape from a patriarchal and capitalist world and enjoy fantasy. That might not actually be the reason that it is so appealing. But since she created that somewhat straw man argument, it was pretty easy to debunk. I have strawmanned before as well. In fact, I have literally strawmanned Willow in a previous video, where I wanted to make my own claim about romantasy, but I was trying to get attention, so I threw hers up and then made my own without completely fairly talking about how she was talking about the genre herself. Avoiding this is hard. You might legitimately try to summarize an argument that you are sort of responding to, but you might still get it wrong. And if you get it wrong despite trying really hard, see tip 1, which is humility. Situational awareness is my third tip. I just admitted on my own video that I previously strawmanned another creator. Why did I do that though, when I'm capable of trying hard not to, and capable of doing a video this length where I actually try to handle a little bit of nuance, although this is clearly an opinion piece? Well, at the time period, I had less than 100 subscribers on my channel, and I felt like I had never caught the YouTube algorithm. So to catch it, I needed a video that was short enough that someone who's never seen my face would be willing to click, but that was also inflammatory enough to make them curious enough to try out. I had incentives that I caved to. Is the video terrible? No, I absolutely don't think it is. I actually think the thesis still stands, and I still have the same opinion that I shared in that video. I still think I made a mistake, but guess what? My whole reasoning was right. It was the first video on my channel that broke through that 1,000 view barrier on YouTube and got people to talk to me in the comments. So how is this situational awareness? You need to be aware as to why someone might be doing something, and it might not even be someone who is so aware of what they're doing. I have the personality that is extremely analytical, and I like to think about what I am doing. Some people don't live that way, and they might not even know what they're doing, but they still could be reacting to incentives. Incentives that say, throw nuance out the window, get a group to engage with you. A moral panic is going to have a lot of engagement in a social media ecosystem. And a lot of people, even if they don't use the term or if they don't know what they're doing, are going to try to feed into that just because there is some benefit for them. Also, be aware of when you find one, and it might be one you agree with, and it's harder than anything to take a step back when you agree with what's being said and say, do I actually agree with this, and can I actually see if this is factual, and is this how I actually want to engage? Also, even with those tips, you will still fall into moral panics because we literally all do.